Post-reading strategies are meant to build fluency with vocab and structures found in the text. So here's something that I do after. What I do is, it's like the choral translation thing, but where the student is telling the teacher what to do and the teacher makes deliberate mistakes. So I'll get a reliable student to point at things in English order. So I'll be like, Quintus ran to school, and then, what do you guys say? Stulta magistra. Like, stulta sum. Ego sum stulta magistra. So it's really fun when the whole class yells at you, stulta, stupid teacher. So then I correct myself. Quintus ran home, not ran to school, ran home terrified, and told nothing to his father. And then everyone's yelled out, stulta. So yeah, of course, it wasn't nothing he told to his father. He told everything to his father. And it's just a fun way for getting students to listen and pay attention to the story one more time while having some silliness and fun. This is a good activity for getting students to write a lot of things based on the story that they will each in turn read. Students, this is Two Truths and a Lie. I think it had a different name under Keith Toder's blog, something else, but Two Truths and a Lie is a better name for my class. Students work in pairs on a single sheet of paper. They write down 2 true statements from the story and 1 false statement, numbered 1, 2, and 3, and randomly. They're not allowed to use the dictionary or Google Translate. They need to steal phrasing from the passage. And that's because if they use Google Translate or a dictionary or look up words in the vocabulary section of their book, then they're going to use words that the rest of the class doesn't know. So I have to drill that with them. It's like you have to steal from the passage. It has to not be new to that passage. And then, as I go around, I label the group's papers A to H, whatever the number of letters are needed, just so that each of the groups has an identity. And I go in some kind of order, like a clockwise or a row by row type order. Then, as people are finishing in their pairs, I correct the grammar of the sentences, and when all pairs have written 3 statements, then I'll get them to rotate. I will be the one rotating the paper, because students getting up and walking around is not the best thing in behavior management. I get one paper and move it to the next, grab the next paper, rotate it, basically walk around the room rotating the papers to the next pair when students have finished writing their 3 statements. And now the student's job is to identify which statement out of the 3 was the lie. And they write down the group letter and what number sentence, 1, 2, or 3, the lie was for that group. Then you just keep rotating the papers around until everyone has seen every group's thing. In a class of 20, where you have 10 pairs, then they would have read 30 sentences. And at the end of it, I'd collect all the papers up and sort of show it on my projector and ask each class, what was the lie for that group? I don't read it aloud because they kind of already read it, but what was the lie and how do we change that lie to a truth? So they've gone and read 30 sentences that they've generated, then they've gone and seen it again, and now they've changed a lie into the truth. It's a lot of input in that kind of activity that's actually quite fun, pretty low stakes for the class. Then there's also, this works better for small classes, I find, verum and falsum questions. True or false questions. So I assign each student in a small class a paragraph from the story to write true-false questions on in Latin. And each student writes their true-false questions on a piece of paper with the paragraph number at the top, so we know which paragraph that's belonging to. The teacher goes around and circles around the students, correcting grammar. You wouldn't think that true-false questions would need correction of grammar, but for some reason they do. And then when each student has written at least 3 true-false questions, at least, because, the fast ones can go and write more of them if they can think of more, that's fine. They're not just sitting there, they can just keep going. But when everyone has written at least 3 of them, you can then either rotate the papers among the students, like in the Two Truths and a Lie thing, so that each individual student then reads the true-false things and identifies which one's true-false, or simply collect all the true-false questions, bring them up to the front, reread each paragraph of the story in Latin, read the true-false statements, and ask the class to verify which one is true. Is that one true, false? And just go through each of the statements that have been written for that. Then rinse and repeat to the end of the story, which means that you get to read the story twice. You get to read everyone's true-false questions, and there's a bit of randomness about it because they're made by students. And yeah, it's overall quite fun and quite a good way to get an extra reading of the lines in a meaningful way that doesn't feel boring. Also, this one, Possible, Probable, works really well for students at the higher year levels, where you want them to be thinking sort of more higher order thinking skills, inferential things about the story that they're reading. And I usually write these myself as the teacher. For every sentence or paragraph of the story, I will copy and paste that, and then write a statement or a bunch of statements that may be possible or probable. Possibile, probabile. Then we reread the sentence or paragraph and read the possible, probable statement for that. And I ask the students to identify whether that statement is possible, probable, impossible, improbable, according to the information that we've gotten in the story. Maybe I'll ask them in English to justify why they think it's possible, why they think it's probable, just to sort of draw out whether they really understood what was going on in the story. This is more complex than answering true-false questions, and because it has likelihood embedded in it, and it works really well for higher level text because students have to think about the story, the plot, the characters, that kind of thing. So for example, this is a reading for my year 12s from Caesar's Gallic Wars. Helveti ferocissimi sunt is the first possible or probable thing. And that's kind of like, that's implied. It's not actually stated in this paragraph, but some of the things that they do kind of make you terrified. So Helveti ferocissimi sunt is pretty probable. Then there's Helveti nihil curant de morte orgetorigis. This comes out from the complex story thing of the Helvetians accused Orgetorix of a crime and sent him to trial, but he refused to go to trial except with an army of 10,000 with him. And then something went wrong, and he ended up killing himself. And the Helvetians ended up doing the exact same plan that that Orgetorix had told them to do, except without the leader Orgetorix. So the Helvetians care nothing about the death of Orgetorix. That has not been explicitly stated through here, but through the actions, maybe you could say that this is pretty probable, or maybe possible if you don't want to read too much into the agency, into the motivations of the historical characters here. So that kind of thing is, it's a lot of inference and a lot of thinking about the whole story, which is very good for keeping things sane when rereading a VC, like high level, year 12 level text. This one I quickly skipped over, but Gartic Phone is a telestrations game but online, so you can have sentences in Latin followed by pictures, followed by sentences in Latin that students are trying to describe the pictures with, and it morphs and it's very fun. So I won't go too far into that. But my last thing is about how do we make authentic texts more accessible. And I have a number of things that I can credit other Latin teachers for showing me how to do. Tiered reading is one of those. So here's an example of an easy version of a classical text. Ego, Vergilius, fabulam canor. Fabula est de armis et viro. Vir iter fecit. Vir jactatus est in mari et terris. Vir per multa horribilia laboravit, quod iuno erat iratissima. Hopefully the language there is accessible to year 12s, but you need to know your students. Like, maybe there will be some things that you do need to check that they know. And you only can find that out by asking them questions or probing them or things like that. You can ask them questions in Latin about that, or you could just explicitly, sometimes you could just do a choral translation with it just to be really doubly sure. So then when you know that everyone's understood that first one, then you go to the second version. Cano de armis et viro, qui Troia Lavinium venit. Now, at this point, we didn't explain Lavinium. Lavinium wasn't mentioned in the previous tier, so at this point you'd probably have to explain what is Lavinium. But at least the number of things that you need to gloss per paragraph has gone down because you've spread them across like 3 paragraphs. Well, there's going to be 3. I mean, there's an original version there. You could spread it over more paragraphs if you want to like make the vocabulary get kind of not even less overwhelming. Cano de armis et viro qui Troia Lavinium venit, Aeneas iactatus est in mari et terris, et multa passus est. At this point, I may compare the words from the previous tiers. Passus est was equivalent to per multa horribilia laboravit. Passus est per multa horribilia laboravit. So I can sort of see that is more or less somewhat equivalent to the other phrase. I can gloss it as endured as well. Ob, which is like quod, ob iram eunonis saevae. And then maybe they'd need an explanation of saevae as opposed to irata or iratissima or something like that. What's the difference between that? Maybe you need to explicitly say it out loud. But now they can read the original version, or I can read it to them aloud. Arma virumque cano, Troiae qui primus aboris Italiam fato profugus Laviniaque venit litora. And keep going, and as long as they understood all the previous tiers, they have so much of an ease in to this final version, which is the original text. So you can make those things, and that's really, that's what I'll be making with my year 12 texts in book 4 next semester. Then there's also Luc Ranieri's 7-step rereading technique, which I'll link to in the description, but this is a very short version of it. It's basically 7-fold rereading of the text, where each time you reread something, you're doing something different about whether you're listening, you're speaking, you're trying to put emotion in it, you're trying to picture things in it, trying to like all that kind of thing. So it's a 7-fold rereading step, which can be very easy to execute on your own as a student. So if you give them this instruction to do it that way, and you trust that they will execute that instruction, then they can do it that way and get a lot of a 7 times sort of read of the text that you're wanting them to do. Then there is elaborated input, which is what I do with Year 12 Unseens. I show them a sentence, clause, or phrase from that unseen. So this is Hyde Unseen 13, which starts with dum de conditionibus inter se agunt. And then I explain it in simpler Latin. Dum Galli et Romani inter se colloquuntur de conditionibus. Comma. Conditiones sunt verba de quibus homines consentiunt, ubi pacem faciunt. And then I ask, sunt ne quaestiones? Habetis ne quaestiones? Do you have any questions? Are there any questions? And I trust my Year 12s pretty well to try to ask lots of questions until they understand the whole thing in Latin. But when I ask them to ask questions, they can ask me questions in Latin or English, doesn't really matter, but I will do my darndest to reply in Latin or with charades to try to stay in Latin when replying to them, so that there is a negotiation for meaning where they're trying to work out what the unseen words are, what the phrases in the unseens are, and I'm trying to give it to them in whatever Latin they have access to. So that's very good, because as I was trying to work out what activities have high amounts versus low amounts of input in them, some activities have high amounts of words per minute, like our language dense in terms of having lots of messages in the target language, and some are really low. Unseen translation, which in my state is 90 words of Latin to be translated in 50 minutes, like a period of class, that is one of the lowest densities of language that you can have, because it works out to be 1.8 words per minute. Whereas, like, on the exact opposite end of the scale, watching a video of Minecraftium, like a video where I'm continuously speaking in Latin while using visuals to support comprehension, is delivered at a rate of about 60 words a minute. So, like, the difference in that, in spoken Latin versus an unseen translation with a dictionary and lots of struggle, is huge. Anything I can do to give my Year 12s more Latin and more spoken Latin is what's going to really support their language growth. So the upshot of this is, like, because I will go through not just that one sentence, but I'll go through the entire unseen clause by clause by clause that way. They end up reading at least 3 times the amount of Latin as what they would have read if they had only read the 90 words of that unseen. And they also end up hearing a lot of Latin because they're asking questions to try to figure out the meaning of the passage. So that's my way of supporting my Year 12s in gaining unseen translation skills. And at the very end of that, whatever time is left in that lesson, then I get students to write out the English translation, which I will then correct up to whatever they finish at, whether that's the end of the passage or like the first few lines of the passage. Whatever they write, I will then correct that to see for accuracy in general, which is good to do for my own purposes. But what is important is that every student has actually read through the whole thing, whether they've translated it or not. Every student has heard me talk about through the whole thing, whether they've translated it or not. So translation, when it gets to that point, is just about the accuracy and just about the English fluency kind of thing, which I'm totally happy to focus on when it's about translation itself. So assessment options in a CI framework include setting unseen translations. Pretty bog standard, nothing wrong with that. Also, I've been replacing seen translation with an unseen translation where the story is an alternate universe version of a story we've read in class, so that it's not possible to just brute memorize a seen translation and call that success. Like, you actually need to know what the words mean in the seen translation in a dynamic way. So making a story where some of the details get changed, but it's mostly the same language as the story that we did in class, is a good way to get around the seen translation problem. Also, reading comprehension is a good assessment because it's faster to mark than unseen translation, but pretty close in terms of what it's still assessing for whole language comprehension. And the question and answers should be in English, not in Latin, for greater testing accuracy, so that students can't just cheese it by thinking, matching chunks of the language together and not actually knowing what those chunks mean. Also, listening comprehension. This I've been finding is, I've just been experimenting with it, but I've been having good results. Listening comprehension is really accurate in measuring students' levels of comprehension. And it's fast to both administer and mark. So what I would do is I would read aloud a story, an unseen story, and have students answer questions on a piece of paper about it. I'd read it aloud more than once. And so students think about it and write their answers to the questions. Pretty short answer questions kind of thing. Nothing too complicated. And it turns out to be really quite close to the level that they have in unseen translate, like really quite representative of where they sit in the class. So that is a really good one because it is quite easy to administer and quite accurate. So here are my links. There is the Totally Comprehensible blog that I mentioned before. The AP tiered readings have tiered readings of Caesar and Virgil, which are really good, very good resources. There's the Airtable database of Latin teacher-created story resources and handouts. There's the Latin Teacher Lab YouTube channel by Justin Slocum Bailey, which has really good pedagogy, like explained very well in video format, better than I can explain in video format right here. There's my Latin YouTube channel, Found in Antiquity, which includes Minecraftian series, TPR videos, a playlist of beginner-friendly Latin comprehensible input, and the Scorpio Martianus, Luke Ranieri's Latin YouTube channel, which has lots of great Latin comprehensible input. These are 3 very helpful Facebook groups that I really recommend you join if you're a Latin teacher. The Latin Teacher Idea Exchange, Teaching Latin for Acquisition, and Latin Best Practices, the Next Generation in Comprehensible Input. They're mostly populated by US Latin teachers, but US Latin teachers are amazing. They have made so many things and they're willing to share it with you. So you ask on the Facebook if someone's already made a resource, and so often they have. Is amazing. The results of all of this that I've seen so far, I haven't been in this long enough to really see the long-term fruits of this, so I don't want to really say what's happened in my situation that much. But in the US, they've reported dramatic results. So Bob Patrick witnessed the Latin retention rate go from, I think it meant to say 2%, not 0.2%, but 2% to 62% retention rate. And the total Latin cohort grew from 130 to 592. What's even more telling was him saying that the special education department in the school was totally happy to place students in Latin for foreign language because they said that they know that their students will be successful in this language. They'll have everything that they need to be successful. And I think that's a powerful thing to say about Latin, one of the most elitist kind of potentially the subject that could turn people away is actually the subject that is drawing people in. And my friend Sarah Durham at Melbourne Grammar School has had great success with using comprehensible input with her higher level students, year 11s and year 12s. So that's really good. I asked for any questions. I have a badly formatted bibliography here with Bob Patrick's 2015 paper in it. And yeah, thank you for listening. Walete. Revocare, pensar,